Um, I was adjunct faculty at various universities in Chicago for about 25 years. And I was in psychology and biology departments. And what I observed was the like loss of sensation and perception in classes and an uninterest in teaching about sensory systems that just declined over the last 25 years. So the full-time faculty in these departments, they were much more interested in cognitive psychology or clinical psychology or other behaviors. But here I'd like to make the point that I think that there should be a return to teaching and sensation and perception, and that teaching people about sensory systems is actually very important. Um, so I was trained as a vision scientist, and that's why I was brought in as adjunct faculty to teach sensation and perception. And it's, well, it seems that uh, the only time they had an interest or did have a sensation and perception class offered is when there was someone in the faculty or someone who was actually trained in a sensory system. Um, so, okay. So historically, sensation and perception classes were a mainstay course in psychology. And it was the very beginnings of psychology began with an experimental study of sensory systems. So Fechner is the person in the 1800s who designed this experimental way to study perception. And so at this time, there were many philosophers who were interested in asking these basic questions. What is reality? Do we perceive reality? And so he came up with this experimental method that allowed the study of this. And so it's called psychophysics. And so I think it's, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what psychophysics actually is. Well, I'll tell you now. It's it's a method where a known external stimulus is presented, and it's usually some form of energy that's measured. And then you measure the behavioral response, which is in vision, for example, is this light brighter than this, or is this red, or is this green, or is it redder or greener, or the same color as another? And so this is quantitative data that allows the study of visual perception. So, so I think it's very important for people to understand the limits of sensory systems, that they're biological systems, limited by our biologies, and that's where we get perceptions from, but it's not necessarily a match to the so-called real world. So I'm going to present just a very quick, really simple idea of the changes in physics and our understanding of the external world from physics. I know you know all of this already, but I'm just very quickly going to mention that and then talk about some of the limits of sensory systems. So it kind of puts us on the same page regarding my call for the more study of sensory systems. So we have what's called old physics. It's Newtonian physics, and developed by Sir Isaac Newton. And what came of that is this idea that the universe is like a machine. So he developed the mathematical equations that allow descriptions of motion, for example. And so the idea was that the universe is like a machine, the material world is predictable, and it then philosophically created this materialist perspective that we've been living with for the last 100 and more years. And so the Newtonian world fits our perceptions. So it's a description of how we move about in our world, how we can build tall buildings and bridges and so on. But then we have new physics, which came about with Einstein and his colleagues, and some very strange ideas about reality are developing as a result of new physics, like there is no such thing as time. Questions about whether time can move backwards and forwards, whether it exists at all. E equals mc squared said everything is energy. There are experiments that have shown consciousness determines outcomes. There's ideas of a multiverse rather than a universe. We exist in many dimensions, and space changes as we move through it. So I know you're aware of all of this, but these are concepts that are quite often new and difficult for the general population to accept. You have to scratch your head a lot in wondering if that's true or not. So the developments in physics have given us a very different view of our universe that doesn't always match our perceptions. And I just have some images on the bottom here that show some of these experiments in physics or these technologies that have given us this new view of the universe. So we have the Michelson-Morley experiment. Light is both a wave and a particle. We have the James Webb telescope telling us about the extent of the universe. The CERN particle accelerator telling us about very small particles, and then the Schrodinger cat paradox that says the outcome is determined by consciousness. So now I'm going to just briefly go through some of the sensory systems and showing how they are limited. So people talk about the five senses, but there are actually more sensory systems than that. And it varies amongst different animals. Different animals have different types and limits of sensory systems. So basically, though, they all work in this same way, where there's a physical stimulus from the external world. For vision, it's light. For sound, it's sound waves. It's mechanical energy that pushes on the eardrum. And then we have receptors that are in the retina or in the ear or underneath our skin. So we have receptors for each sensory system, and those receptors, they're cells, neurons, and they receive that energy, and then it's processed. Everything goes through nerves to the brain, and then it's processed by the brain, and then you have perception, which we would say would be in the realm of the mind. And if the information doesn't get from the receptor through the nerves to the brain, you don't have perception. You're blind, you're deaf, or whatever. And so this is a biological process, and it's the product of evolution. So I'm just going to mention a couple of sensory systems to show the limits. You all know this, I'm sure. But we have the electromagnetic radiation spectrum shown here. And what we call light, which can stimulate our visual system, is a very small range of that electromagnetic spectrum. And we can associate color perception with different wavelengths of light. So it's very limited. This shows the human range. Bees can see in the ultraviolet range. We can't. And some reptiles can see in the infrared range, and we can't. The auditory system. So we have moving objects that push on air molecules and create sound waves, and the sound waves then get into your ear canal, push on the eardrum, and then there are tubes with hair cells that are the receptors, and the frequency of the sound waves and amplitude is picked up by those hair cells. The information goes to the brain, and you have hearing. So there's a limited frequency range for human hearing, 20 to 20,000 hertz. But other animals have different frequencies, a different frequency range. So you probably all know about dog whistles. Dogs can hear in a different frequency range. So when you blow on a dog whistle, they can hear it, but we can't. So sound is a perception. We have this old philosopher's question. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, is there sound? Right? That was a major question in the 1800s that people like to consider. But the answer to that is no. You must have an ear and a brain and that process fulfilled in order to have sound, which is a perception. The physical stimulus for sound is there when the tree falls, no matter what. But you don't have perception without a brain. The vestibular system is not one of the basic five, but it provides us with a sense of balance. It tells us how we're moving in space, whether we're standing up or upside down. And the receptors for the vestibular system are in our inner ear. We have 3 tubes in our inner ear, each oriented in one of the 3 spatial dimensions. And they're fluid-filled, and they have hair cells in them. So when you move about in space, it sloshes in those 3 tubes, and then that information goes to your brain, and it tells you about how you're moving in space. And so here we have a little example. This is a person on Earth, and we're going to ask the question, what is up? If you're a physicist and you want to define up, well, we're going to consider that. So it's very easy. This person's standing on the Earth, and that's up. Now, let's add a person in China. So what's up? How do you define up? Who's up? Then we add in the fact that the Earth is rotating on its axis. So where's up? The Earth is in the Milky Way galaxy. It's going around the sun. Well, it's going around the sun. It's in the Milky Way galaxy in one of the arms, and that is always turning. So actually, if you think about the question, what is up, where is up, and motion, in reality, there is no such thing as non-motion. Everything is in motion all of the time. And you must define up according to a reference point. There is no absolute definition of up. So touch is another sensory system. You have receptors under your skin. When you put pressure on your skin, the receptors respond to that. Information goes through your nerves to your brain, and then you feel touch, hot, cold. And so you can ask the question, well, what if we had receptors under our skin that were so sensitive they could feel molecules moving or cells moving in your arteries or veins, or even atoms? So our sense of touch, and when we touch something as separate from us and in the material world, it's just dependent on the limits of these receptors under our skin and how our brain processes that information. So we could have evolved in a very different way. Animals could evolve in a very different way and have a very different idea of the material world and what's matter and what's not, depending on their biological system. So perception is actually an illusion. All perceptions are actually illusions and created by our biologies. And all perceptions are individual because we all have a unique brain. So every single one of us sees everything differently. It's just we have human brains, so we can talk to each other and we agree with how we describe things. I was trained in color vision, actually, and one of the first experiments I did was where you had to measure colors and say that these two colors, find the place where they were the same color, color mixture like with red, and everybody had a unique setting. There's a normal curve. So people with normal color vision all fit in the norm, and then you have abnormal color vision. But it's unique to each person. And so incoming sensory information is interpreted by the brain usually with such regularity, except for illusions, or what we call visual illusions. So we feel that our perceptions match this real world, and we can all agree on that. But is our perceptual world reality, or is it a matrix? And the Matrix movies, of course, give us a view of, to think about that. They give us a way to imagine this kind of simulation and how the real world really is just a matrix. So I believe that if people understood how sensory systems work and how they are limited and biological, it would be much easier for the general public to understand what physics is telling us, or it would give us a better context to understand that remote viewing really works. Or energy healing, or maybe time doesn't exist, and maybe we are in a multiple universe. And so these are just a couple of people that talk about this and have presented things to the world. Very controversial. They are not well accepted by the mainstream. Some of you may know of David Icke, and he talks about this perceptual world. He talks about perceptions a lot. David Icke is probably the most vilified, ridiculed, canceled person on the planet, even more than Alex Jones, I think. And but he understands this and talks about this, presents it to the general public. And Bruce Lipton is a biologist who tells us also something similar. When he was working with stem cells, he figured out, he says that DNA really isn't the cause of what happens in cells or the body, but DNA is more of a switch, that there's information, energy information coming from the environment, and the DNA then responds to that and makes things happen in cells. So he's providing us with a different view that I think is kind of in agreement with what I'm saying. I just need to see where we're at. Okay. So this is, I guess this is the last slide. And so my call is to have people go back to their departments and maybe speak up and have them reconsider the importance of teaching sensory systems. And especially psychology departments should resurrect the necessity for teaching sensation and perception. Biology departments, I think, should realize sensory systems are very important in the curriculum, but also physicists. So I think it would be wonderful if physics departments had some avenue, some place for teaching about sensory systems, so that young physicists would understand this. They would know the difference between our perceptions from our sensory systems, and it would help them understand better what new things they're telling us about reality or about the universe. They'd have a better context for what their work meant. And that there would be more avenues for this kind of information to be put out there for the general public. That's it.
Thank you, Margaret.
So we have a couple of questions.
If you may return to the second to last slide, this one, yes. So my comment might be a little bit longer, but I will get my question directly to this one. So we saw yesterday Courtney brought his camera. That's a machine sensory system. And our eyes are biological sensory system. As an electrical engineer, I will try to see a comparison, similarity between them. And yesterday after his talk, the first thing that I did was trying to figure out the color response of the sensor chip on his camera. If that one can get into near infrared and he do better job on his other stuff, modify that, and then he could get the image, and then the frame rate, the machine is possible to get higher than that, yes, he could do it. And after verification, I saw that based on the data I have, yes, I think what he got in terms of the motions, all the stuff, I think that's real. What's out of that, I don't know. Now come back to this. So he made a modification to his camera by removing a cover of the sensor to get those longer wavelength paths. And by doing that, the sensor was the same sensor. It's just doing better job to expand the capability to bring up all the capabilities there. Yes, our sensory system do have limitations, which also means the limitation might be different for different people, and that limitation might be able to push a little bit less or more. Is there a possibility, if I want to say the extrasensory perception that we are very intrigued to talk about, if I just change ESP, just change the name, I'm not calling that extrasensory perception. I'm trying to call that extreme sensory presentation. What do you make out of that?
Well, extrasensory perception there may be a receptor or some kind of, or use of one of the sensory systems where it goes to the brain and is processed in a different way. So there may be a biological basis for some of these things that are called extrasensory perception. Nobody's thought about it, I think, or really looked at it. So for example, we have receptors in the visual system that provide vision. When it goes to the brain, it gives you visual perceptions. But also we have roots that go to the brain that set our circadian rhythms. So you can have multiple things resulting. So I would say that that's like a future, something for people to look at. I think what you were referring to is the camera that showed UFOs. And yeah, you just modified the input, but yes, it's there just as much as with regular vision. But
Just follow up this one. What I mean is extrasensory system might not be actually that abnormal. Might be the normal conditions being temporarily enabled.
which I also, one other thing is we do have people who are do extraordinary things that we can't explain, like the Rain Man, right, where you dump out matches on a table and he can count them right away, or he can remember. So we have those extraordinary situations that something's going on with sensory systems. It's just not the norm, and so that's something to look at too.
It's great stuff. I think you touched on this, and I think it's really important to hark on the point that the sensory system did not evolve towards veridical representation. It evolved towards a survival drive, and you can see this in several sensory biases, such as the looming effect in audition, where like an approaching train will sound like it's coming much faster than when it's receding. And even in the foveal vision, where you have the saccadic movement of the eye, that's, it's just jumping around all over the place, but yet our subjective impression of it is that we have this rich visual experience, but actually it's this tiny little pinprint of visual awareness that's bouncing around all over the place. So I think it was a lovely example. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Donald Hoffman at UC Davis, but if not, I suggest you check into his work because he really gets to this from a philosophical perspective as well. So.
Okay. I think, yeah, you were talking about saccadic movement. So the eye is constantly moving back and forth. We just don't perceive it. So it's, again, it's just how our biologies are designed.
Okay. Where are you teaching now?
Oh, I'm retired.
Oh, okay.
I've been retired for a while now.
Oh, I'm so bummed. I was hoping you were at University of Chicago because I was going to say, you know, what would help us is
That's where I got my degree from.
Yeah, but it would help us a lot more if we were allowed to teach parapsychology courses in regular universities.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Mhm.
Thank you. You know, we need the education system, and I want to, you know, Goethe, you know, was really saying, refine your instrument, develop your instrument, your body, right, which are your perceptions, to go beyond. And that's why you've got to jump into the experiment and push those limits. That is really important. So, and we need education because we need to teach the younger generation when they're soft and pliable how to do these things. Because by the time, you know, they get to our age, we're like, oh, you want me to do that? Yes, I think that to me this is so important to do this. And so if anybody has connections to get some of us to be teaching these, I've got my classes already because I'm teaching at the Rhine, but yeah, to have them for university credits, I feel so passionate and determined that great thing that we need to do. So I think we're on.
All right, let's thank Margaret, please.